Greetings all, thank you so much for joining today. Today I welcome you to the second part of my two-part episode with Larken Rose. Last time we discussed libertarian pragmatism, and it was a great give and take. Of course, I'll link to that episode in the show notes. Now, this second part of the interview coming up right now just might check off a big libertarian item at the top of your Christmas list. Let's join Larken and see what's under the tree.
You're skeptical of the state. You're getting over the myth of authority. But the state is still formidable. Or is it? You've got a front row seat in the transition to a free society. Let's dive headfirst into The White Pill Box with your host, Mark Maresca.
Hi folks, today we are doing part two of my two-part interview with Larken Rose. Larken, welcome back to The White Pill Box.
Yeah, glad to be here again.
Today we will be discussing, folks, psychology and statism. Now, as my subscribers know, my podcast is largely devoted to this, and in particular, my 23-part Myth of Authority series digs really deeply into many aspects of this. Today, I'm picking out from there two interesting topics which alone get super deep into psychology, and I want to review them to get Larken's thoughts. One of them is the current status of propaganda in 2025, and the second is the state's own perspective on the belief in authority and propaganda. So, okay, first, the status of propaganda today. Larken, it seems to me like propaganda is losing its effectiveness in some way, and it also seems like that observation is historically unique. I'd like your thoughts on that.
Yeah, this is a very weird development in human history that's never happened before, in large part due to the technology of having the internet. And like now I can say something or you can say something and thousands of people can hear it instantly. We don't need the permission of a ruling class. But it gets more sort of twisted and weird than that, because in a world where you have, and I remember it, I'm old enough to remember, there were 3 TV stations, and there might as well have been 1, but they have 3 to pretend you have a choice. When it comes to the news and anything political, you're hearing the same thing. The 3 are not enough different in any way to matter in the slightest. So all the people who are like, oh, let's tune into the news and see the news and see what's going on. There was a very controlled monopoly on mass delivery of information. Now, yeah, there were already some weirdos who like read books and things like that. But the general public, it was what they were seeing was so controlled. It was straight out of 1984. Let's all sit in front of this big screen and it'll tell us what to think and what to feel and what to believe. And now, just very recently, in terms of like the length of humanity, we have this just ridiculous free-for-all where they absolutely lost the monopoly of control on what people hear. They're still trying to do their propaganda, but the game changed completely. And as the Milgram experiments show, the moment there's a conflicting opinion, suddenly people's brains are like, oh no, now I have to like decide something. I might have to like think about something even. Where if all you're ever exposed to, like if you were raised in some cult and like, here's what we believe about everything, this is all you're ever going to hear from anybody around you, we isolate you on purpose. Like, that's really easy to control what people think. And why is it going to occur to any of those people to doubt any of that or think anything differently? Well, now just people being exposed to different ideas, different factual claims, and it's, the downside of just an astronomical amount of ridiculous inaccuracies. Now we have AI, so people can see totally untrue things with their own eyes. So there's obviously the downside of there's so much information and so much is ridiculous that, yeah, that may not be entirely helpful, but nobody controls it all. So no longer is there the source of, well, we all go to this to get the trusted truth. We all go to Pravda. And it like CNN and things like that used to sort of be that, or at least claim to be that. And now there's half a dozen just random podcasts that have way more viewership than CNN and all the legacy networks combined. So people are like, I can hear different, I can decide what to hear, and it'll be actually different opinions. Now, doesn't mean it's different true opinions, but when there isn't centralized control and there's, more dumb opinions than you could possibly count all over the place about every topic, that automatically makes propaganda change drastically, and it makes those in power lose the control. Like at that point, they have to outcompete other ideas. And that's something they didn't have to do before. And they are very bad at it. And they seem to be getting worse and worse at it because when a ruling class jumps to outright thuggery, like we're just going to beat you up if you disobey, it's not good for the people being beat up, but it's actually a good sign because it means they're basically giving up the propaganda war. So like, we can't convince these people, these uppity slaves, like they don't believe they should bow to us anymore. Now we have to just go beat them up because they're listening to other people. And it's an amazing thing to watch, given that never happened in the history of the world before. Like if the printing press was the last huge thing that, wow, Thomas Paine could print a bunch of his like common sense pamphlet and people could read it and go, yeah, he makes some good points. Yeah. Now you can click one button and half the world can see something if you have a big enough audience. And that totally changes the playing board. And most people, I mean, this is sort of the topic of the discussion. Most people way underestimate how much psychology is the entire thing that matters. It is what gives them all their power. And when the game of psychology and belief and understanding and ideas is out of their grasp so quickly, and things have changed so rapidly and so drastically, that's going to change the world. Now, it doesn't mean there won't be lots of people believing stupid stuff and just random noise in all directions. But a ruling class trying to win the propaganda game when they no longer have control. Like if it's Pravda, well, we own the thing that everybody listens to and nobody else can. So that makes it pretty easy. Like we can call the daily meetings with the slaves and we tell them what to think. Nobody else is coming along and saying, you shouldn't be slaves, run away. Like we own the plantation. That game has changed so drastically just in the last just few years that it's just the game is the people in power have to be in a panic. And I have every reason to think they totally are, because the game is not at all the same and not at all under their control. Anyway, that's my long-winded initial response.
Okay. So there's a couple of tangents to that I want to cover, but you really did touch on them already. One is, how obvious is this? And I think it is pretty obvious. It seems like there's a lot of tangible examples of what you're saying out there. So in other words, it's not like this is some kind of abstract reasoning you had to go through to arrive at the conclusion that propaganda is struggling right now. We have real world evidence. Like, for example, your point about, the legacy media basically this close to bankruptcy. They don't have dominance anymore. That's an observable, quantifiable fact. So there's the tangible aspect of it, which I think you seem to agree with, that it's out there. The second, though, talk more about, if you will, is it what I might call sustainable? Does it seem to be a trend that's continuing and is likely to continue? Or could it be that it's merely a dip in the effectiveness of propaganda? But, that's just a dip. It'll get back to 1960s, 1970s, three network stations again. We just happen to be in a tough time right now. What's your perspective on the sustainability of this trend?
We're not ever going back. They will never have the control they did before. And to not have the control, that's one of the reasons I say statism is doomed. And as much as lots of people are still statists today, this empire and all empires are going to start falling apart precisely because you can't go back from this. You can't undo it. Even if we're banning the internet. Well, unless you're banning wires, that's not going to matter because people are going to find ways around that. And the mentality that shifted with it is massive, because now even with things like YouTube and stuff where people can post whatever they want, and a bunch of it is just inane kind of meaningless stuff, and Google, even though Google is basically trying to get us back to the controlled information thing. It used to sort of be a search engine. Now it's like, no, we're going to tell you the government approved version. And just really obviously, like if you search for anything that matters, the bias there is getting ridiculously obvious. But the fact that young people now grew up expecting to be able to look up what people think. What do people over here think? What do people in Russia think? What does this guy think? This guy says that. Does anybody disagree? Oh, here's 15 people who disagree. Now, if they don't have the discernment to figure out what's true, they may fall for all sorts of bogus stuff, but they are now accustomed to just a barrage of 8 billion viewpoints. Now, this little slice of it is the government approved view, and almost nobody trusts that anymore, like including most Democrats and Republicans. They're like, wow, we don't trust Fox News, but for some reason we think NBC is telling us the truth. Well, until they stab us in the back, and then we're not so sure about them. So the expectation of freedom of expression and being able to hear different opinions all over the place, that can't be undone. And they are in deep doo-doo. And again, there's so many pros and cons of a lot of this, but now one of the funniest and most encouraging things to me, even though it's still mostly statist and a lot of it's just people being rude, is there'll be some story about, whatever in the news, and I'll be like, I want to post a comment making fun of this statist propaganda. And I was like, 700 people beat me to it. Like it's the cops proudly announced that we caged somebody for having a joint or something. And hundreds of people chime in on their page, on the police department's own page, and says, you psychos, why aren't you going after actually dangerous people? Like when I was young and taught to respect authority and all that, never in a million years would I imagine that government could come out and say, here's what you should think. And in the exact place they said that, 800 people would say, don't believe these lying scumbags. And now that's the standard. It's what everybody expects. And to see just barrages of comments under everything, just like, we don't nearly trust you, you're totally lying about everything. And, and to have that back and forth be the new norm this has even gone to the courts, which is funny. Where police department websites and politician websites, they tried to take things down, tried to block people for disagreeing, and it went to the courts, and they're like, that now counts as the public discussion, and if you're a police department, you're a government agency, you don't get to silence the public discussion. So if you come out and brag about some authoritarian thing, or we're looking into this, and 8,000 people want to say, no, you're not, you're trying to think of a way to cover up for your thugs, you don't get to delete any of them. And there have been court cases where people went in saying they blocked me for literally doing this. I've threatened a couple police departments myself with, if they block this, because we know they have, here's how they can be sued. And at least one then stopped blocking people because they're like, oh, that'll just make it even worse. So the fact that back and forth and open public criticism, that makes a massive psychological difference. Because if it's the emperor has no clothes thing. If you have that same scenario of that story, but 800 people anonymously can say, duh, the emperor obviously has no clothes, and other people can go, well, I was thinking it, but I didn't dare to say it. But yeah, the whole monopoly over what people think just falls apart. And again, Milgram showed this too, that even when it doesn't occur to anybody to disobey authority, if they see other people going, this is bogus, and we don't have to put up with this, we don't have to obey, suddenly people go, oh, that's a thing you can think? Like, never would occur to me before when it's 3 networks and they tell us what to think. So even just somebody saying, yeah, democracy is bogus, voting for a master doesn't mean he has the right to rule you. The number of times I would have heard that in my entire childhood listening to all 3 networks is exactly 0. Now there are people saying it. There's not that many people saying it, but as soon as somebody hears it, they're like, huh, is that a thing you can think? And they can't undo that. That's never going back. They can frantically try, which I'm sure they will, but the expectation now among young people is, I can say what I want. Other people can say what I want. I can decide whose opinion I want to hear. And nothing's going to make them go, nah, never mind. We just want to hear what the government has to say. Like nobody, Democrat, Republican, or anybody else would think that's okay anymore. Even the ones who still fall for the normal status lines about things. So this is one of their main tools just exploded in their face and it cannot be rebuilt. At this point, it's just impossible.
Okay, that's perfect. You've covered everything I wanted to cover without me even to have to ask half of it. So I want to wrap up that point, the point of how does propaganda look right now in 2025? And I think if we put a label on it, it says, we could say, it's not looking great. It's certainly, not doing all that well. It's certainly not doing the job fully that it's supposed to be doing. But just as important, it does seem to be on a trend that seems sustainable. Now, I should just quick tangent from here. When I've talked about this with some people, they'll always throw in, well, the government could become North Korea. The government could start a nuclear war. That would stop that trend. Yeah, I know all those. I know an asteroid from outer space will end all this speculation. I do try to focus on what the plausible coming timelines are, not anything I can concoct in my head. Yes, the government can destroy us with a nuclear war, and that is possible. I'm not saying it's impossible. But assuming that doesn't happen, I'm trying to argue, what are our plausible futures? And that's why I wanted to hone in on the status of propaganda. So is it okay for you that we label it as propaganda is not doing too well at all right now, and it's sustainable?
Yeah. Yep-a-rooney.
Cool. So wrap it up, put it on the shelf right now. We're going to grab it from the shelf in a minute. But right now I want to move on to the second topic, the state's own perspective on the belief in authority, and in particular propaganda. Now, everyone, Larken's deeply studied the myth of authority and how it impacts the common man, the culmination of which is, of course, his Candles in the Dark seminar. But this topic takes the state's perspective. And I thought it would be fun if one way we can illustrate this is through a little bit of play acting. So Larken's agreed to be the state in this little play, and I'm the interviewer. Larken's role as the state is what I might call the composite totality of all statism. It's psychology, it's reality, as it is today, as it is across the world in all its different status geographical places and through all of history. Larken is an AI knowledge database of that. And me as the questioner, I'm expecting what I would expect, say, from an AI, which is a simple, objective, honest answer, no fluff, no window dressing, no propaganda, nothing like that. I think that'll illustrate the answers that the honesty I'm expecting to get. So, hi, State. How you doing?
Not too well, but hang in there.
I knew you were going to answer that. Honestly, see, that's what I mean. Okay. My first question. I noticed that you guys, in all your forms, are always engaged in massive, relentless propaganda. Why do you do that?
Because if you're going to control people, you have to control how they think and what they think, especially when the population is armed. It can't just be brute force. It can't just be we're physically controlling you. Like the people vastly outnumber those in power who are trying to control them. And if you can't convince at least the majority to want to be obedient and think it's in their best interest to be obedient, you're not going to control them at all. You have to have them to want to be subservient, at least most of them. And then you have to do other things to deal with the few that aren't. But only constant propaganda has any chance of tricking people into wanting to be the basically subservient livestock to somebody else, so that we have to do that. That is the primary source of power of the state is propaganda. The overt violence is like what you use when that doesn't work on certain people, but you can't have a sustainable control over people just by brute force.
Okay, and that was going to be my second question. Why not just use brute force? Because, on the surface, it strikes me as simple. You point a gun, you tell a person comply, they comply. There's an elegant simplicity to that, whereas propaganda, it seems really complicated. You have to manipulate a human mind into self-compliance. And I also notice that you guys are doing it constantly, relentlessly. So it also seems very resource intensive. And whereas brute force seems simple. And so my instinct was to say, why not just forget about the propaganda and just use brute force?
It's all a matter of scale, because you can't, if you're trying to live off of other people, If you're trying to have it so you're wealthy as a result of your livestock has to outnumber you. You're not going to be as successful like beef rancher if you have one cow. So you have to have a bunch of them. And if you have a bunch of anything that's sentient and it doesn't want to be controlled and it doesn't want to be slaughtered and it doesn't want to be bossed around, the resources required to use physical force on every one of them is just astronomical. Now, there is a step in between where if you can use physical force now and then to make an example of one to try to scare the rest into compliance, that's a tactic too. But even that is more propaganda than force. It's a little bit of force, a whole lot of propaganda to try to make people think, well, I'm not going to step out of line because I might be the next one they beat up. And for example, the IRS, former IRS commissioner said, yeah, if people ever figure out we're 99% bluff, this system's done. But if each one of those people think, well, if I step out of line, they're coming after me, we can control huge numbers. If everyone just goes, well, what if we all step out of line? We can't do anything about it. So just in terms of scale, brute force here and there to one little disobedient subject, yeah, that works and it can help scare the other ones. But on a grand scale, if they all decide they don't want to obey, no amount of brute force is going to keep them in line, which is why you need to keep them in line ahead of time with propaganda and mind control.
Okay, so in a sense, the more brute force you were to use would actually work against you, because more and more it would become obvious to people that they're being controlled, and people don't like that. Whereas with the propaganda, you're saying that gets them in a mindset or a cloud where they just want to self-comply, and your work more or less is done. You could sit back.
Yeah, and that's a very important point, because if there's one uppity subject who says, I'm not going along with this, if we send our enforcers and beat him up or shoot him or throw him in a cage or whatever, the only thing that matters to us immediately after that is the mindset of all the other subjects. If all the other subjects are like, well, he probably shouldn't have stepped out of line, I'm going to be obedient. Okay, that worked. It's even better if all the other subjects said, well, you disobeyed, you deserve it. That's the ultimate propaganda we're going for, where the other livestock actually hates the disobedient livestock. But if we victimize somebody and the rest of the livestock are like, we hate you for doing that to that guy, we sort of think he was right, we're in deep doo-doo. And that shows that the mindset of all the people we didn't go after yet, that is what determines whether we have any future of control or not. And that's why the propaganda, whether it involves physical force or not, is so important. Because if they all say, now we're even more angry, like what you did to William Wallace, now we're really mad at you. It's like, whoops, we shouldn't have done that. If we can make an example and make other people go, okay, we'll stay in line, good. But to know which one we're supposed to do, we have to keep a track of their mindset. And that's all about the propaganda. You can't just do physical force because, like you said, you may find that, oops, we used physical force in the wrong case. In fact, there was a case down in Texas during the COVID thing where there was the blonde woman with like a salon or something who said, I'm not closing. People work for me. They rely on me for their living. And we tried to make an example of her of, well, then you're going to go to prison. And the judge said, if you just admit you did something wrong, then we'll let you go with a warning. And she's like, I didn't do anything wrong. And we thought, okay, make an example of her, put people in their place. Didn't work. You don't get to know what happened behind the scenes, but what happened in front of everybody is the next day, the governor who signed the thing to begin with said, nobody can be prosecuted for disobeying this anymore. We're letting her go. The lieutenant governor offered to pay the fines of the woman and apologized. Because we watched the mentality of all the other people in Texas and found that didn't scare them into line. That made them really mad at us. We can't have that. We cannot control that many people. We failed in that attempt at mind control and propaganda. We have to backstep. Like that attempt at individual thuggery to make an example absolutely backfired. We're like, never mind, we're letting her go and paying her fines, and we're not going to do that anymore. And there are a lot of examples of that, of the Bundy Ranch thing, where it's like, we're going to huff and puff. And if they stand up, we have to realize, okay, at some point, being the big bad boss doesn't scare everybody else. It just makes them really, really mad. And that is key. And we pile tons of resources into making sure we know where the mentality of the human livestock is, so that we don't push them over the edge where they're stampeding and slaughtering all of us, because all of us is that much compared to all of them. And if they ever figure that out, like the grasshopper said in that A Bug's Life or whatever it was, if they figure out how much they outnumber us, well, it's over for us. So it's still, the mind control is the thing that matters, even when you're using physical force.
Okay, so it is the thing that matters. So I sense in this, I'm picturing like a cause and effect type of set of relationships. I see what you referred before to as this belief in political authority. I see how that causes the state, how you can't have the state without a ubiquitous belief in authority, a population-wide. I see that causal connection. I see the causal connection more or less between the state being incentivized to propagandize. They will do it. And what happens when they do it successfully? You're saying it reinforces that belief in authority. And if the belief in authority is reinforced, it continues to allow the state to persist causally. So if I'm interpreting this right, we're seeing a toxic causal loop here that through all of history seems to sustain itself very, very well, with propaganda being the one thing under the control of the state that they seem to have to use to keep the oxygen supply running to the belief in authority.
Right, because you can't, even if you're just silent for too long and people start to talk and people start to question things, the things you taught them that don't really make sense and aren't really in their interest, they start to fade and they start to doubt and they start to think other things. And that's why things like ritual are very important. The psychological effect of, for example, having all the children pledging allegiance to the plantation that they're part of every single day, till they feel an emotional attachment to people who are ruling them and treating them like livestock. And you can't pause that for a year and still control people. You can't even pause it for a week and still control people. It has to be, because what we're teaching them is lies, because we're deceiving them. If you just don't say anything for a while, some of them are going to start figuring out the truth, or at least questioning things, and then they're going to talk to other ones. The primary enforcer of the livestock has to be the livestock. In other words, if one of them says, I'm not sure we need to obey this guy, I'm not sure he's legitimate, the first line of our defense against potential dissidents is not our enforcers. It's their fellow livestock. We need them to all believe in an obligation to obey us. So if one of them stands up, the other ones say, what are you doing? Just obey the law. Like, if you just do as you're told, they won't have to beat you up. Because then, instead of having our tiny number of enforcers and a bunch of them, almost all of them function as our enforcers. But that only happens if they're completely brainwashed. Like, to get slaves to hate their fellow slave who got whipped takes a lot of programming, and generations and generations have focused on how you train the livestock to think this way, so much that when one person stands up, they don't have the others on their side. The others view them as, why are you causing problems by disobeying the master? You're the problem that we don't like. And there's a movie out there called Jones Plantation, which I really think we should try to ban because too many people are learning how we do that. But be that as it may.
Okay, so I want to put a pin on something you mentioned, and I was going to ask the question, okay, I gotcha. Brute force is not particularly effective, or at least not long-term effective. Propaganda is important. And I was going to ask, but you sort of answered it. Why don't you guys ever just lift the foot off the gas pedal of propaganda a little bit? Because it's so resource intensive, and frankly, it seems exhausting. Why do I never witness any of you states ever in history, ever anywhere, experimenting with just easing up just a little bit? I never see that.
Well, that gets into the psychology of us. And sociopaths don't like to give up control, even a little bit, even temporarily. And it is quite true that we don't back up. And in a lot of cases, that has resulted in less than ideal results for us. For example, you get something like the French Revolution, where people put up with it, and then the backlash was drastic and violent, and that tens of thousands of people were getting their heads chopped off. And so part of that is just we get used to getting our way and controlling people and being in charge of what they think. And the idea of backing up and regrouping isn't something we've had to do very often. And frankly, it's not something we're very good at most of the time. And that's been the downfall of many individual empires, as a matter of fact, when they didn't know when to back off, even just to win the support of the livestock. Like, they're getting too uppity. Let's be a little bit nicer. Let's cut back on how much we're whipping them enough so they sort of feel okay and they calm down a little bit. Now, the closest we do to that is put on a show pretending we're going to do that. But that's part of the propaganda, is say, oh, we're thinking of doing away with the income tax and replacing it with tariffs. No, we're not. What we're doing is making it so the people all upset by that particular injustice feel like there may be some relief in the future. There won't be. But if they feel like there's going to be relief in the future, they're less angry about it. If they can see some hope on the horizon, I mean, that's why we do democracy entirely. If they think if we vote for this guy, he'll be against the establishment, so we don't have to like rebel or revolt or disobey or anything like that, we'll have our faith in that guy to save us. That's why we do democracy, and give them the illusion that they actually have some power by way of our system. That's just part of the propaganda machine. And that is a main focus of when the livestock starts getting uppity. How do you disperse and dissipate that anger in a way that is no threat to those of us in power? And one of the ways is we'll give them an election every once in a while so they think they have some say in the matter. And they will vote for the person who says, I'm against the big mean people who've been bossing you around. Of course they don't. They all work for us anyway. Then they get disappointed and they go, oh, and then they feel discouraged and exhausted. And like, we worked so hard to get that guy in office. But we don't care if they're still upset with us. If they're exhausted and not fighting back, that's perfectly fine. They're complacent and obedient again because they threw all their time and energy into something we designed for them to do. They would accomplish nothing for them. And then we'll do it again 2-4 years later. But all of that is still part of the propaganda thing, because if they viewed us as one monolith dominating them, there would be no illusion that we represent them or they consented to anything or any of that. And they would feel like what they are, which is livestock. And then they would try to run away or overthrow us or get violent at us, whatever. Mm-hmm. So all of those things are part of the propaganda. All the things that may look like, well, this is part of a political process. No, that's part of a propaganda process, all designed to make it so the livestock obeys and doesn't resist. And that's all. And yeah, it is way more complicated than doing it by brute force. But brute force just doesn't work at this scale long term. So we have to do things this complicated.
Okay. So, and in the example that you brought up, State, the specific attempts to appear to back off are still part of the overall propaganda. So that really wouldn't qualify as lifting off the gas pedal. That's still doing more propaganda, just in different flavors. So if I read you right, the idea of taking Sunday off simply because it's so resource intensive, and let's just try a little less because we don't want to expend as much, and that's the reason for backing off. You would never contemplate doing that. How would you classify that if you were to attempt to even do that?
No, all the wealth, all the power, everything we get comes from the mind control over the people. We're never taking a break on that. We will put on a show like we are. Like, one of the best ways to make it appear we're doing that to be nice to the livestock, like I said, is elections. But the aftermath of those is always this candidate or this party is going to criticize the heck out of what that party just did. And then the people go rah, rah, rah and put them into power. They don't actually undo what they did. They increase the grip and the pressure in some other direction. But right now, the closest thing to relief is, well, this pressure is just sitting where it already was. It's not actually letting off. It's not backing up. But now we're going to apply more pressure over here with this party and this candidate until they get upset with that and like, we're not going to put up with this anymore. Okay, well, now we bring in this guy. this side can hold still for a while and this side can move forward and make it worse. It's like tightening chains on two wrists of a slave. It's like, this one's too tight. Okay, we did away with the master that keeps tightening that one, and we're going to tighten this one, and you're going to go, oh, well, at least that one's not being tighter. Ow, this one's too tight. Okay, we're going to distract you from that by not tightening. We're tightening this one. And people are simple enough that even just that trick works, and they rarely even notice that every single candidate is railing against other injustices that we've done to them and never undoes any of them. Just puts a pause on focusing on that one to push forward on a different one until people are sick of that one. And then we, sleight of hand, move it to somewhere else, push somewhere else.
I see. So that really well illustrates the absolute causal importance of propaganda to you. And that also suggests to me that the very absurd idea of you intentionally backing off on propaganda in general, just to save some money or whatever, save the stress, is, can I say it's suicidal? Like, you would just not do that because of the prospects of what would happen.
Yeah, we would never back off, and it's what we have. We took from the livestock anyway. We're not, and the livestock are the ones doing it anyway. Like, the people at the top aren't like working really hard to do this. They're paying other livestock to do this to the other livestock. Yeah, it would be absolute suicide for us to, just let them think for themselves this week. No. Every day, every week, every hour, if we can, there has to be some new distraction, some new thing that keeps them scared, that keeps them divided, that keeps them thinking that we matter and that they need us. That has to be constant. And that has been, in that way, to a large degree, technology has been a huge help for us. Because if you have a country full of people who are minding their own business, before television, before telephone, and they're farming and they have their different things and they're trading and stuff, and you tell them, oh, a bunch of people way over there you've never met and you don't know need a huge chunk of your paycheck. First of all, how would you even tell them that? You're going to send someone all the way out to the country just to tell them that? They're going to look at each other and go, no, what are you talking about? We don't need you. Like, you're not doing anything for us. This is our life. These are our neighbors. Go away. The technology gave us the means to tell everybody about our laws controlling everything, our taxes controlling everything. We didn't even have the means to tell everybody. Like when their colonies down the East Coast, and then people are moving west, they outran us for a while. Like, there's people moving west all the way to California. We can't even keep up with them to keep them under control and keep them robbed. So until we caught up, but technology allows us to do that. I mean, imagine if we passed some new law and didn't have a way to tell people that we had. What good would that do? Nobody would know there was a new law they have to obey. Nobody would care. Nobody would obey us. So to a large extent, that technology was a huge boon for us for a while until the communications got so that we didn't have a monopoly of control over what people hear. But yeah, we can never take a break, especially now, because now it isn't just how do you tell these people they should be happy to be slaves. It's how do you get them to not believe thousands of other people saying maybe we shouldn't be okay with being slaves. Like, now we actually have to compete with other people telling them the truth. And that is way more difficult than just having a monopoly on what they hear.
Okay. All right. So for this particular discussion state, if I could label this, the conclusion of this, it's that you would regard a diminishment of the effectiveness of propaganda as, if you didn't do it yourself, if you did it yourself, it would be suicidal. But if it happens, it's certainly a catastrophic prospect for you. Is that safe to say?
Absolutely. And it's the amount of time and effort it took to build up the power we have now. You can't just redo that. If you lose grip, you can't just build it back a week later. For example, just as the example of the United States, the people who grew up here believing, wave the flag, I pledge allegiance to the republic, all that indoctrination, if somebody else came in tomorrow and said, we're your new government, none of them would believe it. It takes a massive amount of time and effort and energy to indoctrinate people to feel loyalty to their oppressors. And if you lose that, you can't just rebuild that overnight. It took literally centuries to get to the point where the livestock, where so many of them feel such an attachment and a loyalty to their particular plantation and the people who run it. You can't just build that out of nothing. You can't do it overnight, and you can't do it by brute force. So no, we're already in a panic, and no, we can't afford to take 1 second off, much less like pause or back up with the propaganda. We'll pretend we are in different ways as part of the propaganda. But yeah, we know how much we have to lose if we lose the minds of these people. We lose everything. So we have to keep focused on that constantly.
Very cool. Okay, so, and scene. Larken's done a great job as the state. And the fact that you kept your mind on that and your grammar was perfect. And so on, perfect. Now, this isn't just an idle exercise. I want to now take that insight that the state regards a diminishment of the effectiveness of propaganda as quite a catastrophic circumstance. And I want to now pull our insight from before back off the shelf, which says right now, in real time, propaganda has become less effective sustainably. If these are two puzzle pieces, when I put them together, I see an image from that doesn't merely say, oh, the state has, the state should feel worried. It seems quite profound. Before I kind of share my thoughts on that, do you sense any profound or mildly profound implication from the merger of those two insights?
Absolutely. That's why it's one of the main reasons I say statism is absolutely dead. Because you can't, it's like a cult. If you let all your cult members wander around and talk to other people and hear lots of different points of view, your cult's doomed. Because they're going to go, oh, most people don't believe this. And yeah, now that I think about it, some of these teachings don't make any sense. And when people are exposed to ideas that aren't blind obedience to this imaginary authority, even if their first reaction is basically pro-master, it's like, no, we have to have government, we have to all obey. The fact that there's a discussion inside people's heads of thinking about these things is deep doo-doo for the ruling class, and they can't undo the situation they're in. And they're actually, I was hoping it wouldn't come up while I was being the state, because I didn't want the state to have to admit he's an idiot. But right now, the propagandists are idiots. Like, they're nowhere near the level of competence and brilliance they were with, what was his name? The guy in like the 50s, the father of propaganda and
Bernays?
Yeah, Bernays. Edward Bernays. He was a genius. Now I look at what they're doing, and I looked at this during the COVID circus, and I said, have they gotten this dumb? And they did. And at first I was like, okay, maybe this is like a chess move, and it only looks super dumb. They're getting really bad at it. I think they coasted on the momentum created by actually brilliant psychologists and propagandists. I mean, evil, but still brilliant. And now, right when their propaganda, their ability to control things is falling apart, it's being run by imbeciles. Like, you do not want your choices to be Biden and Trump if you want the people to think highly of those in power. And the discourse back and forth has just become laughably stupid. So I very much believe, this is the thing I can't prove, I very much believe that they're in a complete panic because all the competent propagandists have run for the hills. That's why all they know how to do now is recycle. Can we bring back the war on drugs? Like, who do you think that's fooling? Like, they're just trying to recycle stuff that, well, it worked ages ago. Yeah, but it doesn't work now when, like, most people smoke marijuana or whatever. It doesn't work the same. And I see them doing chess moves that, like, they're playing chess like a rabbit or something. They're just bashing pieces around. Is this working? Is this working? And that, I think it's so easy to look at, well, right now they have lots of power. There's still a big military blowing people up. There's still a giant extortion racket. There's still this and the other thing. And if people are going, well, that's still there and it has been for a long time, they miss exactly what we're talking about. Yeah, but the psychology that is absolutely necessary to uphold that is absolutely falling apart at the seams. and it's not going back. It cannot be rebuilt. So it's just a matter of time. An analogy I've used before is I used to do tree work. I used to take down 100-foot tall trees, usually dead, and I would line it up, and I would specialize in making them fall where I wanted them to, like not on somebody's house or their garden. I'm going to make it fall right there. And you wedge it and line it up and back cut it. And I had a fun habit. I worked on a ground screw and had a fun habit of I'd wedge it and I'd back cut it and line it up, and I'd listen to it and go up. And then I'd go sit down. I'd usually have a crew of some other people. Like in the summer, it was student crew, and I'd sit down and go, there, we're done. They're like, what? We're done. Just sit here, take a break. They're like, what are you talking about? The tree's still up. No, it isn't. Because if I'm listening to it and I start to hear the main strands snapping, nothing's going to keep that thing up. Now they look at it and look, it's exactly where it was before. Well, almost exactly. It's about a 20th of a degree farther this way than it was before. And those main strands, the big ones, I can hear them snapping, and it's not going to stand back up. It's all the way. And sometimes I think my record was like 20 minutes where we sat there until it fell over. But it'll often be 10 or 15 minutes because there is not the support to hold that thing up. The fact that it's still 100 feet tall right now, that's not going to help it be 100 feet tall in half an hour. It's going to be on the ground, and nothing is going to undo it. Like, you can go put duct tape it around all you want. You're not going to hold up that tree. It is coming down. And it's, to me, that's what I'm seeing of the state right now is there are fundamental breaks in their propaganda and mind control, which cannot be reversed, cannot be fixed. The fact that the big machine is still in place doesn't change the fact that it is not going to be in place for that much longer, and there's nothing they can do about it.
Okay, so you brought up the tree, which was so great because it gives a visual of the cause and effect relationship. And I harp on this a little bit in my podcast and my series because cause and effect governs how things operate, even if it's psychological. So unless I'm grossly wrong, the population-wide belief in political authority is the fundamental causal factor that gives us and persists the state. Propaganda being essentially the oxygen supply for that, which you illustrated as the state. You have to be continuous, just like we have to continue to breathe. And by the way, at the right concentration of oxygen / concentration of full-on propaganda. If the world's going to see a transition from statism to a free society, the transition period will have to be something akin to an exponential curve where things are slow at the beginning, they sharpen up, and eventually it's utterly unstoppable. But since we have this causal relationship between the belief in authority and the state, it seems like the transition to a free society must necessarily be characterized by the status of the myth of authority along the way. It's not going to be characterized by saying, oh, look, that fire department got sold to a private company. Yeah, that's an outward manifestation. But before all that, in the early stages of the transition to a free society, it seems to me, and I want to be challenged if I'm wrong about this, it must be characterized by strictly the erosion, the slow beginning erosion of the myth of authority. How can I conclude anything else from all the things we've talked about today that we have already tangibly begun the transition to a free society?
Yeah, we absolutely have. And one of the things I've talked about before is how there's sort of the intellectual understanding of why authority is impossible and doesn't make any sense and all that. But there's also a gut level, which for the real world matters more. And because there are a lot of, I can't even count how many people I've met who are like, I read your book. And I was like, yeah, of course, this. Like, I already was that. Like, it didn't even feel like I was reading something new. It just felt like, well, this lines it all up. And now it makes sense in here, what I already knew in here. That people don't have the right to boss me around. What on earth is that? And so society in general, there has been, just in my lifetime, and my lifetime is none on the timeline of humanity, but just in my lifetime, there's been a huge swing away from authoritarianism to the point where, people used to like, oh, the president, oh, and now we're like, that scumbag, blah, blah, blah. And nobody used to criticize the cops. Nobody used to criticize the troops. There was this profound level of, and, before I was born back in the 50s, it was even more so. The nationalism was even stronger. But now the number of people who are able to say, yeah, the cops suck, and even people who say, well, some of them are good, but this is horrible. And like the people who are able to say authority was wrong about this is it's almost everybody now. Now that may seem like, well, yeah, they can say it's wrong about a certain thing. That doesn't mean they don't believe in it. Kind of, sort of, yeah, kind of, sort of, no. Because if you as a human being can think, I have an obligation to obey these people, unless they do that, and then screw that, I'm not doing that. That's already somebody putting their own brain above the authority, which means it's not authority anymore. Because if you say, I don't have to obey you, you are saying, I do not recognize you as authority, because authority is the thing that has the right to rule, the thing that you're obligated to obey. So even if it's just a few, and that's why one of the things in Candles in the Dark and one of the things in the Mirror is, can you think of a law that's so bogus that you don't think you'd be obligated to obey? Almost everybody can think of an example. Different people come up with different examples. But what they're saying is, if the law said that, I would be perfectly justified in disobeying. Okay, how about resisting? And then people have to think, well, yeah, I guess, if it's gun control or if it's this or whatever the law is that they think is bogus, the fact that almost everybody can get to that discussion pretty easily means their loyalty to authority is pretty dang weak at this point. People used to say, my country, right or wrong. Wow. Like literally, I will be loyal to the bad guy if he's my bad guy. Most people don't like to say that. I mean, some people still believe that, obviously. But the fact that so many people are capable of saying, this government's corrupt, they're all a bunch of liars, blah, 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 blah. And the biggest favor I think Trump did is to lower the level of discourse between politicians instead of, my honorable colleague believes that this. Now it's like, you scumbag, you lie. That's actually progress. Because if the livestock view the masters as lying scumbags, it's kind of hard to feel like a deep emotional attachment to lying scumbags and a deep emotional feeling that we have to obey them. And I'll mention this, I've mentioned it before, but I have to throw it in. That years back, there was a poll. It was one of the big polling outfits. I forget which one, Gallup or whatever, that asked people, if you could cheat on your taxes and get away with it, would you feel bad about that? And for the first time, it was a big change from just a few years earlier. More than half people said, I wouldn't feel bad about doing that if I could get away with it. That means those people are paying out of fear, not out of a feeling of moral obligation. And if your obedient livestock is only obedient not because they think they're supposed to, but because they're scared of you, the day they're not scared of you is the day that you, as the tyrant, you're finished. And there's so many little ways in which humanity has been headed that way in recent years, faster than at any point in history, that even though most people don't intellectually understand why government's bogus, there is a very strong and growing distrust and resentment towards all politicians and everybody who claims the right to rule, to the point that, the tree has already gone far enough that it ain't coming back. It may look really close to where it was before, but that momentum, it only goes in one direction. If you have a 10-ton tree and it's this far over, it's going to be that far over. There's nothing you can do to pull it back up.
Right. And the momentum of a transition to a free society it does have exactly that momentum.
Yeah.
It isn't fully visible right now. And it's certainly not something that people are labeling as I just labeled it. I'm not aware. I mean, I don't watch all libertarians out there, but I'm not aware of anyone who said the transition to a free society has commenced. Mm-hmm. I think I may be the first to have said that. And that doesn't make me special. All I'm doing is observing what's around me. But I can tell you that just psychologically, I don't know if you know this, but I'm right at my 50-year, roughly, anniversary of being red-pilled. I mean, that's long. I can tell you that for 47 or 48 of those 50 years, I felt like all libertarians felt, I want all this to happen, but I'll probably not live to see this transition begin. That's something that's 1,000, 500, at the least we would say would be 100 or 200 years. And to this day, most libertarians say the same thing. If you had put me at a time or gone back and told me back then, guess what? There's going to be a day when you're going to be able to say, I'm living it. I'm not going to see probably the world get there, but I'm living to see the start of it. And guess what? I've got nieces and nephews and they have children. They're going to see a decent part of the world free. The purpose of my White Pill Box podcast really fundamentally is to try to give fellow travelers reasons for hope. That seems to be one of the uppercase ones that I've stumbled upon. And I don't know if by my phrasing it that way just a few minutes ago, perhaps for the first time for you, did that resonate with you in any way?
Yeah, and I haven't said it that way, but that very much matches my belief of where we are, the inevitable now. It's not even just we have some hope. It's all the way inevitable that it's just like the tree. There isn't enough to hold that tree up. It's going to come down. And it's funny because you've actually been a voluntarist like twice as long as I have, but I can say the exact same thing, that for the first 15 years of that, I was like, maybe, couple hundred years. But right now, people aren't paying attention. And now I'm to the point where I'm saying, this is, unless I get Clintoned by somebody, I fully expect to live to the point where I see large areas of stateless society. And like you said, not the whole world. That's going to take a while longer. But if somebody had told me that 15 years ago, I would say, no, not nearly in my lifetime. But that's how parabolas work. That's how accelerations work. That's how trees falling over works. Like, it can take 10 minutes to get from this to that. And then it takes about 20 seconds to get to 90 degrees, and it ain't going back. And coming to that realization, because for many years, I mean, just like you, I was like, well, I'm going to keep saying these things and doing these things. It's not going to do any good. A few hundred years, maybe people will figure out the bleeding obvious and stop cheering for their own enslavement. But seeing that movement, another analogy I've used is a barge. Like you have this old tugboat pushing this 80 gajillion ton barge. And it's like, we're revving our engines. The barge is just sitting there. We're revving our engines. The barge is just sitting there. It's like, wait a minute, line it up with the shore. It moved. Like, it only moved an inch, but it moved. And if you got a barge to move an inch, the momentum of that is massive. And it means it's going to keep moving, and you keep pushing it and it keeps going. And if you're looking at, well, right now it's only an inch away from where it was. Yeah, I know. But now you have however many 100 tons moving. It's not just going to stop, because now you don't have inertia, you have momentum. And coming to realize that as I was going along thinking, this is hundreds of years in the future, and then seeing good signs here and there and go, maybe closer. And then realizing, holy smokes, it's not nearly that far away. And just like the tree, the farther it goes, the faster it goes. And propaganda will very much be that. If, let's say the whole population, if a 20th of all the opinions they heard were voluntarist, statism is gone in a year. Like, most people never hear of it. They never hear the ideas at all. And you may think, well, if there's 19 people who are statist and only one that's voluntarist. No, if people even hear the idea and the possibility, if everyone is hearing that even just once in a while, the shift that makes and the speed with which that can change is just massive, and faster than literally anything that's happened in the history of humanity, because of our ability to communicate the way we do. And I think we're going to see a shift that's just kind of unimaginable, how quickly we go from, we're all worshiping these warmongering psychos and giving them trillions of dollars, to they're just gone. Like, we disobeyed. Yeah, there'll probably be some skirmishes and nasty stuff as they get violent, try to cling to power. But, if there was a country of you or a country of me, we're not going back. We're just living our lives like people who own themselves. We're not going to suddenly decide, what we need is somebody violently dominating the rest of us. Like, no, it's a one-way street. We're not going back there. And so I'm absolutely optimistic. Even when I just made a video having a total tantrum about, why don't people ever learn their lesson of, like, every time people explain, this is exactly what tyrants are going to do, and they do it again, and people go, rah, rah, rah. And so I made a video having a tantrum about that, but I'm still completely optimistic because the belief in authority is falling apart.
Well, it's that insight that we're so much closer than I ever imagined also does have a psychologically uplifting effect. Now when I message, let's say I'm trying to red pill someone, I don't even think of it in one degree as being, oh, this is a contribution to this overall skepticism. I don't even think of it like that. Now I think of it like I'm helping one person wake up. Me, personally, I am really, really grateful that circumstances lined up for me at whatever, 19 years old, 18, so that people were presenting me ideas that changed me and red-pilled me. I would never want to put those blinders back up. So I consider my life better than it was in that respect. And any anarchist, any red pill person I've ever talked to is likewise. Like they never would want to put the blinders back on. So I do know that when I do manage to get someone more skeptical or even red pilled fully, I'm helping them. And so that more for me is a motivator for continuing to talk to newbies rather than the older feeling that, oh, I really hope this contributes. The analogy I've been using recently is like we've up till this insight for me, we've all thought of this as a race, like a track race. So I'm running a race. And who else is going to bring us across the finish line but us, the libertarians? We're the ones with the insights, with the clear-headed, objective thinking about statism. Who else can tell others and eventually bring us across the finish line? And now with this insights about technology and all that, I've realized it was a relay race. We ran the first leg, and the baton has been taken from us. Technology took it, and it is speeding ahead so fast. And in a sense, I could say to myself, I guess I could keep running my little pathetic first piece of the race. And I am going to keep on talking to people, but I'm going to talk to people more from the satisfaction of converting and not thinking it's me and my fellow cohorts that are going to get us across the line, because I kind of see now who's running faster than me. That's my analogy.
Yeah, and I think it's easy for people to sort of view, well, the government is the problem, it's us against them, and not recognize, well, actually the problem was between your ears, and it's still between the ears of the guy next to you, who's not an evil person, who's not trying to oppress you, he just taught to believe some bogus stuff, and that person and that person and that person, and the fact that it's the enemy is a belief. It's Wizard of Oz stuff. It isn't like, oh, how are we going to stand up to that? There isn't a that. There's just the belief in that in all those minds. Now, yeah, there's violent thugs, but even those violent thugs are only doing it because they believe in authority too. And so to realize that this isn't defeating a bad guy, it's basically taking the leash off people and letting them run their own minds and then run their own lives. And then there's nothing else to do. It's not, if we free enough, then we can go have a glorious battle. It's, if you free enough, there isn't a battle. There's nothing to fight against, because the thing they were all scared of and the thing they all believed in, that was the enemy. Just that lie. The lie is the enemy. And there are some sociopaths, but they don't stinking matter if the decent people don't believe the lie. So just, it's just sort of opening people's cages and like, here, come out. And then they're out, and then they're one of us. And it's not like, no, you must be subservient to my beliefs. It's like, no, I'm not telling you what to think. I'm telling you, like, you get to decide what you think. Stop letting other people decide what you think. And realizing how powerless the state really is, and that it really isn't a thing. It's this, there's the gang over there, but all their power comes from the belief of these people. And if that lie goes away, the whole thing goes away. There's no big monster to fight. There's just a lie in all these people's heads. And most of these people are decent, and they mean well, and they want to be good, and they want to know what's true. To some extent, obviously, they're challenged with that too. And it's just outgrowing a childish superstition. And that's all that needs to happen. That's not the preparation for a big battle. That is the battle. And then we're just done with that. Then we can, start living rational human beings instead of livestock.
And of course, the other thing that's encouraging about that is that, and this was also an insight that kind of popped in my head maybe a year ago, was that I always pictured this bucket of skepticism that needed to reach a tipping point to where things are too uncomfortable for the state, and the state eventually it's out the window. But it had to reach that. I always assumed that the only qualifier for adding your cup to the bucket is you got to be full on 100% ANCAP red pilled. And I don't know, one day it occurred to me, it's not that way at all. Of course, if that happens, that's a nice full cup that adds to it because that's the best quality. But really, for every person who's getting a little smidge more skeptical out there, not ANCAP, but just they see things that makes them go, that's a thimbleful of skepticism. That's getting added to the bucket now. That is a number you can multiply by 330 million. Whereas if it was only the one ANCAP, it's like, well, how many ANCAPs will we ever make? Not a lot. So I think that bucket is filling up really much faster than I ever pictured because the entire population is, not consciously, of course, constantly adding a little more skepticism. And we're closer to that tipping point, I think, than we would have ever imagined.
Yeah. And I think that's something that a lot of pro-freedom people miss is how many people are our philosophical allies, even when they're statists, to be making a difference. Like our car says in big shoe polish on the back, defund the government. And there's a bunch of smaller, like enemy of the state and stuff. In Arizona, we constantly get honks and thumbs up. The vast majority of those people, I guarantee, are still statists.
Exactly.
But if somebody's a statist and like, yeah, I don't trust any of those scumbags, that is very much adding to the bucket, as it were, even if they haven't figured out, oh, wait, you mean government's all the way bogus? No matter what, I never thought about that. And I think the state's going to collapse, and most people still won't have all the way realized that government's inherently bogus. It'll just be like, we're not obeying these twits anymore. In fact, we're not obeying anybody anymore. Like, we don't trust any of you liars. And then they can later sort out, oh, yeah, we never should have anyway. Like, here's the intellectual reason. But if the gut level reason is we're done obeying you psychos, we're done feeling any obligation to do what you say, the rest is sort of, that's just the cleanup after after the tower falls over, is people sorting out, oh, yeah, this is why intellectually we should have known that the whole time. But yeah, we have one of the reasons I like Arizona is there's a lot of people with the leave me alone attitude, even among most of the statists. And that's like, you don't need them to all the way philosophically understand or read a treatise on Austrian economics. If enough people go, yeah, you don't get to, I mean, Yavapai County north of here, when they did the shutdowns and the mask mandates, a bunch of the people said, we're not doing that. And the sheriffs looked and said, yeah, we're not doing that. The sheriffs told the governor, we're not enforcing any of what you just said. And like, wow, when your enforcers say we're not doing this, your grip on the livestock is pretty dang slim. When your own enforcers feel emboldened to publicly come out and say, you have no right to do this to the people and we're not enforcing it for you. Like, that is the worst nightmare of the people in power. And it just kind of happened. It happened in a number of places in different states. And if you're at a place where you can't even count on your enforcers to enforce your will, like maybe they will, lots of them will, some of them won't, like you're in trouble if you're the tyrant, and they are in trouble because that is happening more and more.
Well, if the purpose of this podcast is to dispense white pills, that is a big white pill, especially if I can phrase it as we've started our baby steps toward the tangible transition to a free society. Although in your Oscar-winning role as the state, I suppose it's a huge black pill. Sorry to, tell you that.
State wasn't happy about that. But.
No, not at all. But I do think that's a great place to wrap up because we're at the hour. Thank you so much, Larken, for taking the time with me today on the show. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about or plug?
I think that wrapped it up nicely. I would throw in a thing that for pro-freedom people, keep an eye out for those little signs of disobedience, even in people who are still statists, because it's very easy to see, well, this person still advocates that I be taxed and robbed and stuff. Look for the part of them that's already drifting in the direction of voluntarism, even if they don't understand it. Because at this point, that's almost everybody. Like lots of people are like, I don't nearly trust Trump. I don't nearly trust the Democrats. I don't nearly trust this. And find that in the other people you talk to, even if they're still statists, and sort of encourage that part of them to grow, even if it's not to the philosophical level yet. And that will make you way more optimistic too, because you'll realize, wow, they may not philosophically be at this level and they've never thought about these things. But there's a whole lot of people here who are just sick of politics and not falling for the scrap anymore and are ready for something actually fundamentally different, not just the next puppet to be on the throne. So yes, I think there's lots of reason for optimism.
Yes, and sage advice too. Okay, so folks, you are missing out if you haven't seen Larken's content, so please do take a look at the show notes and check out his website, the Rose channel, his video content, and so much more. And as always, many thanks to everyone out there for joining us today. Take care, and see you next time.
Thanks so much to all subscribers and everyone who joined today. And remember, keep looking for those white pills.